Hey, what's up, everybody? I'm back from Singapore. Then I was back from Japan. And now I'm getting ready to go to Canada. Right after this video is over, I'm going to throw a suitcase on my bed over there, pack it up, get ready to go to Toronto for Canada Cup this weekend. I'll be heading out there to do Street Fighter commentary. So if you guys tune into the stream Saturday, you'll see me commentating Street Fighter from like mid-afternoon till the end of the night. I'll be doing a bunch of commentary unless my schedule changes, in which case everything I just told you is wrong. Just tune into the stream Saturday. I'll see you guys there if you're watching Capcom Fighters. But I've been doing a lot of traveling. As I mentioned, I was in Singapore for C Major 2018. I did Street Fighter and Dragon Ball commentary there. Then I came home for like 30 hours. I did the Tekken recap show. Then I jetted on over to Japan to go to Master Cup. I got home from Master Cup and I was planning to stream, right? I was in Japan for Master Cup, got home and I was like, this is it. I'm going to do 2 days of streams right before Canada Cup, ramp up, hit Canada Cup, and then I'll be home. And when I got home, I was feeling it. I was in that weird in-between place where you're so sure that you're about to get sick. You could feel your body aching a little bit, right? You're like, oh man, I'm so close. So I rested. I took some time to just relax and kind of recover from all the international travel. I feel so much better today. I feel really great. So I figured because I have all this energy, I would shoot some videos for you guys today. And I shot some videos like this before. I've talked about different things on my channel where I just sat down and was like, all right, this is what I want to talk about. Interesting topics to me that I thought were fun to just sit down and talk about for 10-15 minutes. And today is a good example of one. In the meantime, I noticed the content has slowed down because our lovely YouTube overlord has squeezed as much out of it as he could of all the streams that I did before I left. But I'm going to give him a couple of videos to upload this weekend for you guys. This one, I'm going to talk about Master Cup and kind of the shenanigans that happened at the end of that. And then I think I might have one more after that. Maybe. We'll see. If not, tune in to Canada Cup this weekend and watch me there instead. But today we're talking about a topic that's very interesting to me. I talked about this at Master Cup with a bunch of people, and it's just such a fascinating one. And I got here in an interesting way. We started with the language of fighting games back in the video I did, the match analysis of Super Noon versus Hook Gang God. The very first set they played over in Mexico at Thunderstruck. And Super Noon did a setup on Hook Gang God, and I said that was a nice fuzzy that he did right there, right? He got hit by the fuzzy. And someone in my chat asked me, what's a fuzzy? You know, I've never heard, I don't know what that means. I've never heard that word used about fighting games. What is it? And so I explained what a fuzzy was. And when I did this, and I was explaining what a fuzzy was, I was like, yeah, he hits him in the air, and even though he tries to crouch, his character model is standing up so he can get hit by instant overhead. Like, I was explaining what a fuzzy was, and it made me realize that fighting games have its own unique language. And then I thought about it and realized that I guess sports have their own language. I guess other esports have their own language as well. When you listen to, you know, Dota commentary, and he's like, oh, he blinks in and gets a 5-man echo slam on the Rosha. You're like, what is he saying? I have no idea what this means, right? There's this unique language that really is only spoken by the people who are interested in whatever this sub-community is, right? And on commentary, we use all these words and phrases so often. You know, in fighting games, we borrow a lot of our words from combat sports and grappling and striking and stuff like that. We borrow a lot of those terms and phrases, but we do have our own unique language that we speak that you really have to kind of dive into and learn if you're interested in fighting games and interested in playing them or even interested in watching them. Like, you need to figure out this language and learn how to understand it and learn how to speak it, right? And there's so many words and so many phrases that you have to learn, but you start to pick them up quickly, right? Because it starts with like neutral and footsies and option select, right? Like, what's an OS? What's an option select? What's a Kara? Why can you Kara a throw, a focus, an FADC, an uppercut, and a super? What's a Kara? Why can you Kara 5 things or 7 things or 9 things, right? Why can you Kara with forward medium kick and forward heavy kick? What do you mean you can Kara with 2 things? What does that mean, right? It doesn't make any sense. How do you meaty someone? How do you do a negative edge, and what does that even mean? What's an OTG, an IAD, an FADC, or a YRC, or even a PRC? Or what's just an RC by itself, right? None of that makes any sense in the brain of somebody who's new to fighting games, right? You're like, this doesn't make sense. You're just speaking a completely different language than the person you're talking to. And the interesting thing about that is that, you know, you really have to learn this language by living in it, right? Much like a real language, the easiest way to understand it is just to live in the language, right? Live in a place that speaks the language. Hang out and watch fighting games all the time, and you start to hear these words and phrases more and more often. It starts to become like drilled into your brain. You can use the context clues to figure it out. You can Google, what does this word mean, right? You can Google Translate and try to figure out like, oh, okay, now I understand what neutral means. Now I understand what a YRC is, or why he can IID over on the other side and do this. Like, okay, it's starting to make sense. Now I know why I can Kara 9 different things. You know what I mean? These words and phrases start to like pick up and make more sense to you as you spend more times in fighting games, or in the language or the country of fighting games, right? Much like a real language. And what's so interesting to me is that I brought up how I explained the word fuzzy to someone earlier. And the next point I hit in my head when I was thinking about the language of fighting games was right after that, because I explained what a fuzzy meant. I was like, yeah, his character hurt box is, standing up like this, and he hits him on the head, instant overhead, even though he's trying to crouch. And I was explaining the fuzzy, and then I thought about it, and I was like, well, also, guy in my stream chat, I explained what a fuzzy was, but a fuzzy is also this. There's a second definition for a fuzzy. And this fuzzy you use in this circumstance, right? There's 2 different definitions for the same word in this language. And I thought about that, and I realized that a real sentence is, can you fuzzy the fuzzy? Right? And then I realized that it's like, it gets even deeper. If you're playing Dragon Ball, it's, can you fuzzy OS the fuzzy after the snap? Right? And you're just like, it doesn't make any sense, right? It just gets so crazy, this language that we're speaking, this wild language that we all know, right? I'm like, why is our second language so absurd? And I realized that much like real languages, there are regional dialects or differences in the language depending on where you learn it or where you pick it up. And kind of the interesting regional dialect example that I thought of was French Canada to the French they speak in France. Because I went to DreamHack Montreal, and while I was there, everything was in French. It was the craziest thing ever, because I've been in Canada before. And when I was in Canada, it was fine. It just felt like it was similar to the U.S., actually. I was in Toronto, which just felt like the northeast of the U.S. to me. It didn't feel that different. But when I went there, everything was in French. They spoke to me in French at the airport. I handed the guy my U.S. passport. He spoke to me in French. I got in an Uber. That guy spoke to me in French. I was reading the signs. They were in French. The streets were named in French. The menus were in French. Everything was French. And I was like, this is crazy. So I had a conversation with someone about French Canada while I was there, and I was talking about the French. I was like, man, it's crazy. I imagine people must come here from France all the time because they can speak the language locally, right? And he was like, well, sort of, because our French is very different from what they speak in France. And I thought that was so interesting. He's like, yeah, the words, even like words have different meanings sometimes, or the way we put them together, or there's like words that we use that they don't and vice versa. It's so like bizarre, right? There's such a big difference. And I brought this up in my stream, and someone in my stream chat, his name is Bassfree, he's French, he's a KI player, was like, yeah, the French that they speak in Canada is like not real French. It's very different from our French. It's like, it's so 2 sides of a different coin, right? It's like completely ridiculous to think about the 2 right next to each other, because you can use them in so many different ways. And I thought about that when I realized that fuzzy had 2 different definitions, depending on whether you live in French Canada, which is versus games, right? You can get fuzzy and hit by an instant overhead. Or whether you live in France, which is string-based games like Tekken or NRS or whatever, where fuzzy refers to defending in a certain order or pattern to cover multiple offensive options. There's 2 different definitions of the same word. So no matter where you speak French, it's still a little different. Which is what I was thinking about. And all these different communities have these different dialects or uses of the same word. So even if you know the same language, it might not mean exactly what you think it means when you're in a different community, right? When you're in a different place. And that's another thing about fighting games that makes learning it a little tricky, right? You have to be careful about how you use these words and understand all the different definitions of it. And that's why I mentioned that, learning by living the language, right? Moving to a place where they only speak that language is so important in a situation like this, where you want to figure out fighting games. You have to involve yourself in the fighting game community, listen to it constantly. You have to speak it constantly to try to figure it out and make sure you don't mess it up. The first few times you say it, you're like, yeah, that was a nice fuzzy there. And the guy's like, yeah, it was. You're like, I nailed it. I could speak this language now, right? That's one phrase. That's like the how are you doing today of speaking fighting games, right? Which is really cool. And I realized, like, when I was thinking about these regional dialects, I was thinking about the language of fighting games and how complex it can get, that there are glossaries for fighting games, but I wish there was more. And I wish there was more of a visual glossary for fighting games, right? Something that we don't see often. There's a lot of lists of terms, right? This is what neutral means. This is what footsies mean. This is what Kara means. But there's no example, right? Oftentimes, there's not like a visual example. There's not a lot there to really go off of. If you don't know what it means, when you're trying to read it and pick, find a definition, it can be a little tough to figure out how to use it correctly, right? And so I was thinking about maybe trying something like that later on when I have some time. That might be a project that I delve into, doing a visual glossary for some basic terms on fighting games, seeing how much effort that would take. But fighting games are cool, man. It's so cool to me just how many words and phrases are unique about our language of fighting games, and that's why I always like explaining it to people. So when somebody comes to you and you watch this video, you understand everything that I just said. When someone comes to you and says, "Hey man, what the hell is a YRC?" right? What the hell is this? What the hell is that? Then that's when you, the responsible speaker of this language, have to pass it down. All right, we don't want to end up like Latin, as like an extinct language, all right? We got to end up as a language that multiple people can speak. Everybody can speak it all over the place. Maybe they even speak just a little bit, right? All they need to know is a little bit of that language for them to start getting more interested and more involved in fighting games. So, yeah, this is a topic that I just thought was so interesting. The language of fighting games is really cool, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I've been traveling all over the place, so I apologize for no streams, but I'll be back very, very soon. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in, and I hope you guys had an extremely lovely day.